social media. And we've now had 23 days in court arguing this case. We've been there on 4 different occasions for a total of 23 days, costing the South African state, I guess, at least 5 to 6 million rand. That's what it's cost them. It's cost me less, but still a substantial amount. And we're now at the stage where in April we have the debate between the lawyers. It's called the heads of argument. And then on the 21st of April, the committee makes their decision on whether I'm guilty or not.
That's now.
Yeah, it's very soon.
Wow.
And so we've won every single point in the trial. We won every single one. There's not one moment that they have succeeded. And as you indicated, we had Tim's Angels came out. We had Nina Teichhold, who wrote this fabulous book, The Big Fat Surprise. She gave testimony for one day. And at the end, the prosecution's lawyer just threw up his hands. He couldn't ask her one question in cross-examination. He didn't. Not one question.
Because she was just like, bam, bam,
it was
bam.
so clear. Then we had Zoe Harcom from Wales, who just completed her PhD. Although she's a mature woman, she did a PhD looking on all the evidence that was available in 1977 and 1984 when the dietary guidelines came out in Britain and America. And she said, if I'd been alive then, or she was obviously, but if I'd been a scientist and I'd collected all the information, what would the information have said? Turns out there was no evidence. There was absolutely no evidence. There were data on about 2,000 people, mainly males who'd had heart attacks, and the diet made no difference. So on the basis of an absence of evidence, we changed the dietary guidelines. So I testified for 5.5 days. I gave over 900 slides of information. And I was cross-examined for 3.5 days. And they couldn't budge the evidence.
So when you were cross-examined, I mean, how was that experience to be cross-examined?
I loved it because within about half an hour, I realized the guy had no argument.
Wow.
And so, I'm quite a shy person. People don't understand that. And I always assume I'm wrong. People think that you assume you're right. Now, if someone criticizes me, I immediately assume I'm wrong and then say, okay, well, let's look at the argument. And then I say, no, actually, he's wrong or whatever. So I began by thinking there must be something wrong. There must be something wrong in what I've said. Somewhere there must be some flaws. And there weren't. He couldn't find any flaws. And we had some great moments. At one stage, he held up our book, The Real Meal Revolution, you see, and he said, and what is this? This is a public statement about something. You see, I said, no, it's not a public statement. That's a book.
That's it. It's just a book.
It's just a book.
Yeah.
And that kind of blew the wind out there. But and another fine moment was when he said I was the cause of the problem because, you see, what had happened was when I gave my evidence to initially said why I shouldn't be charged, they had to then form a committee to hear me, and it never happened. And that's one of the weaknesses in their case, is that they didn't give me the right to reply properly. So he said, you're the reason why we're here today because you didn't write the letter convincingly enough. I said, no, I'm not the reason. The reason is because you guys didn't give me the right to speak.
Right.
And one of the jurors just got so angry when that was said. She was almost trying to go and throttle him. So that was the interesting. But one of the really interesting points was that the people from CrossFit came out to South Africa. Now, Greg Glassman, who founded CrossFit,
Serious.
He became interested in me because he discovered that scientific paper had been fraudulently changed to implicate CrossFit as a very dangerous activity. And it came from the American College of Sports Medicine. They weren't directly involved, but they were indirectly. And he suddenly realized that there's a thing called exercise as medicine, which is the argument that as long as you exercise, you can eat what you like. And that's a cover for sugar and processed foods, because they argue that if you are exercising 2 hours a day, well, the extra Coca-Cola a day doesn't make any difference, which of course it does. And he started digging and got some investigative journalists involved and realized that Coca-Cola is behind this whole movement, that they are the front. Exercise as Medicine is fronted by Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola funded also what's called the Global Energy Balance Network. And we indirectly exposed that as a Coca-Cola front.
Wow.
So anyway, he came out to Cape Town and we had a discussion and we gave some lectures. And we had a long chat, and then he said, listen, I'm going to send my investigative journalist out. And he came a week later, and we sat together for about 10 hours. And he went back to California, and he wrote this incredible expose showing that the case against me is directed by 4 people who served on a committee for the International Life Sciences Institute. And it turns out the International Life Sciences Institute is a Coca-Cola front organization. So every single expert witness that they brought in, except one, the 3 expert witnesses they brought in were all from ILSI. They all were former presidents or on the board of ILSI, which is a Coca-Cola front. But it's not just a Coca-Cola front, it's a front also for other organizations like Pfizer, Unilever, and Monsanto, and has links to tobacco in the past. And he since published another article very recently showing that Coca-Cola funds 216 organizations in the United States, 216 organizations, so-called health and fitness organizations. And so it's clear what they realized 50 years ago, that sugar is highly addictive and it's highly damaging. And the only way they can prevent people realizing it is by controlling the information that came out. And so sugar hides behind carbohydrates. But if you attack carbohydrates, you're going to expose sugar in the long term. So that's why we were targeted. And I think that's, in a sense, why the case was brought against me. Because we were starting to make too much impact in this country, and too many people were starting to question processed foods and sugar. And they had to shoot the main voice down, and so that's how they did it. And it was... people said initially that there is a conspiracy. I never said that. I said, what I don't understand is the evidence is so abundantly clear that what we're doing in nutrition is wrong. And it's so abundantly clear that if you change and you cut out the carbohydrates, or you restrict and you cut out the sugar and the flour and the vegetable oils, you get better. It is so obvious. The evidence is so clear. How can my colleagues who are clever people, have PhDs and medical degrees, how can't they see it? And the only reason they can't see it is because they're being told not to see it, or they're being paid not to see it.
Exactly.
And that's now I understand. 216 health organizations in America funded by Coca-Cola. So that's how I see it, and we're going to win the case in April.
Of course.
And
of
then,
course you are.
And then what's going to happen is we're going to say, okay, South African public, you've been lied to for 50 years. What are we going to do about it? And that's point 1. Point 2 is that the state brought the case against me. The Health Professional Council is a state body. So the state brought a case against me. But the Health Professional Council also controls all education in medicine and dietetics in South Africa. They draw up the guidelines. They say what you must teach. And now we're going to say, okay, you brought a case against me. I proved you were wrong. We proved that the dietary guidelines are wrong. What are you going to do about them? And so we're hoping that the public will realize. So just as I see that the scientists are all in Washington, there's a whole, now Trump is anti-science, I'm not sure it is, but I mean there's this whole movement in the United States against government. Well, when on April the 21st, I want to see all of South Africans in the streets saying, what's the HPCSA going to do about the dietary guidelines? So in April will be the last court sitting you'll have. And then after that, you feel like the establishment at large will be questioned now. Yeah, I hope so. I think. Do you think the media will? Is that what's going to drive this? The media is so pathetic in this country. I don't think they'll do anything. And I'll tell you why not. I'll tell you because there was one other big thing I didn't tell you about. So I was charged on the basis of 2 or 3 documents. Three documents. One of them's not material, but one of them was a scientific paper done at the University of Cape Town and the University of Stellenbosch, and with input from the University of Liverpool. And this was a meta-analysis, an analysis of supposedly low carbohydrate studies compared to high carbohydrate studies. And the conclusion from the study was that there was no difference, no benefit on going a low carbohydrate diet. What the South African media reported that showed that debunked the Banting diet and it proved it was dangerous. Well, actually it proved nothing. It just proved that the high carbohydrate diet was no better than the low carbohydrate diet. And there was no evidence of danger at all. In fact, it disproved evidence of danger. And this was carried throughout the media in South Africa. So it was part of this whole campaign against me. And it came out, and I was charged about a month later. And in testimony, the complainant, Claire Yulsing-Stratum, stated that she had not put in the complaint and they hadn't acted until this paper had been published because they wanted to make sure that they were being correct, you see. And she, in testimony, says that big organizations were waiting for this paper to be published. But unfortunately, we didn't cross-examine her and ask her, so what were these big organizations? Because we didn't understand at the time how important it was. Anyway, I was working through some of the documents, and then I came across an article which was highly critical of me, in which it said, well, anyway, this was now going back to December 2012. They said, well, anyway, in 2 months' time, the Medical Research Council, University of Cape Town, University of Stellenbosch, is publishing a paper showing that low-carbohydrate diets are ineffective. So now this is February 2013, but the paper is only published in July 2014. And it struck me, I said, but if they had the evidence in in February 2013, why did they delay for a whole year? Because they could have nailed me then. Why did they wait a whole year? And I said, there's only one reason. If that study had actually shown that the low-carbohydrate diet outperformed the low-fat diet, they couldn't have published it.
Right.
So imagine if the person who did the study was so convinced that the low-carbohydrate diet is dangerous. She told everyone, oh, we're going to nail Noakes. It's obvious, you know. And then she goes through the data and she discovers, oh my gosh, the low-carbohydrate diet outperforms the low-fat diet. What would have happened? Because now she's lost credibility and all these other people. And what's the South African public going to say? Certainly, they're not going to charge me. So anyway, one of my angels was Zoe Harcombe from Wales, the meta-analysis expert. So I woke up one morning and I said, I think that paper could be fraudulent.
Really?
I said, that's when I woke up, and I said, but who can I find in South Africa who can look into it? Who I can trust? There's no one I could trust, you see. So I said no. And then I said, but of course, Zoe Harcombe, in 2 months' time, she's coming out, or 3 months' time, she's coming out to give evidence. Send it to her. So I did. She said, Tim, send me the 14 articles that they used the meta-analysis of. So we did that. And a week later, she wrote me, she'd already written half a paper. And she said, there are 14 material errors, which are significant errors, which don't look like they were simple errors. They look like they were manipulated. And she said, there's something seriously wrong. So I said, okay, let's write it up. So we wrote it up and we published it in the South African Medical Journal on December the 3rd, 2016. So it was published now a month and a half ago. Zoe then presented that a month earlier in the trial. In fact, in 6 weeks earlier, she presented all the evidence in the trial. And she was cross-examined on it by their lawyer, who was informed by the authors what to ask. The authors weren't there in the trial, but they had no answers. So the opposition, or the people who wrote the paper, have known about it since early October. To date, and today is the 26th of January, they have not responded to the complaint. They've not written to say that we're wrong.
So what's going to happen since they haven't responded?
Well, in my view, when I look at it, there is no response. In my view, there are things in that paper which suggest that they manipulated the data.
But I mean, how are they going to defend themselves in some aspects? Because that's pretty inflammatory.
It is.
To their perspective, you know.
It's terrible for them because they brought the case against me. It cost me millions of rands. And they didn't know that, but it was used as evidence against me and led to the prosecution, which cost me millions of rands, cost the state millions of rands. And anyway, if it is fraudulent and these are scientists, then unfortunately that's the end of their careers. And there are senior scientists there. There are senior people in South African medicine involved. So we're just waiting to say, well, what's going to happen? We have written to the journal that published the paper, because the South African Medical Journal didn't publish the paper. We wrote to the South African Medical Journal because this is a uniquely South African issue. And if we publish in that journal, it's irrelevant. No one would pick it up. And they are looking into it. Seriously, they're looking into it. And if it is fraudulent, they will retract it. And that will then indicate that the universities in South Africa will have to do something about it, because you can't have senior scientists who have perhaps published fraudulent work in the past. That, unfortunately, that's the end of their career. The one thing about science is you have to be 100% trustable.
So does that mean you could go after them, or does that just mean that their careers their reputation is destroyed?
In a sense, in the totality of the case, it shows that the trial was set up on a fraudulent basis. It was a malicious prosecution. Because not only that's the one bit of evidence. The other one was a letter written by the Dean of Medicine at the University of Cape Town, in that position as he was then, and the Professor of Medicine and the head of dietetics at UCT, wrote a letter to the Cape Times saying that the university completely dissociated itself from me.